The cold was a constant companion. It lived in the stone floors of the great house, seeping through the worn leather of her shoes. It clung to the damp walls of the scullery, a permanent chill that soap and steam could never quite banish. It was in the biting wind that whipped off the sea, a wind that smelled of salt and distant ice. Sigrid felt it most in her hands, which were perpetually chapped and stiff, the knuckles red raw from lye and endless scrubbing. She lived on the far edge of the estate, in a forgotten cottage that leaned into the wind like a tired old man. It was hers because no one else wanted it. The roof leaked, the floorboards were warped, and a persistent army of rats had claimed the walls as their own, there scratching a constant, frantic heartbeat in the quiet of the night. It was a miserable place, but it was hers. Here, she was not a servant. She was not the girl with downcast eyes who scrubbed away the filth of nobles and never spoke unless spoken to. Here, in the damp, rat-infested solitude, she was just Sigrid, a creature of silence and cold. Her only joy was a tiny patch of earth behind the cottage, hidden from the main path by a thicket of gorse. Nothing was supposed to grow there. The soil was salty and poor, the wind too harsh. But for Sigrid, things grew. A sprig of thyme, a stubborn mint plant, a single, defiant rose bush that produced pale, ghostly flowers, their scent fragile against the brine of the air. It was her secret. The only warm thing in her life. The other maids whispered about her. The girl in the rat house. The silent one. Corinne, the head housekeeper's daughter, was the cruelest. Her words were sharp little stones, aimed to bruise. "Look at her, hands like a corpse's," Corinne would sneer, her own hands soft and pale. "Probably talks to the rats. They're her only friends." Sigrid never answered. She just scrubbed harder, her focus narrowing to the grime under her brush, the world shrinking until it was only the stone and her aching back. She had learned long ago that silence was a shield, a thin one, but a shield nonetheless. Then the wolves came. They were not normal wolves. They were the king's. Great shadow-pelted beasts that moved with a chilling intelligence, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light in the twilight. They were the executioners, the trackers, the living embodiment of King Bastion's will. They were fear made flesh and fang. They swept through the estate's lands, a silent, deadly patrol. The deer vanished from the forests. The foxes went to ground. A hush fell over the territory, a collective breath held in terror and awe. King Bastion was in residence at the coastal fortress, and his hounds were on the hunt. No one knew for what. One evening, returning to her cottage with her meager portion of bread and cheese, Sigrid found them. A ring of them, sitting silently around her small, dilapidated home. They were not growling, not moving, just watching. Their eyes, ranging from amber to a startling ice blue, followed her as she froze on the path. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. This was it. This was how it ended. For some unknown transgression, some offense she wasn't even aware of committing, the king's justice had come for her. She couldn't breathe. The cold air burned her lungs. She thought of her hidden garden, the pale rose. A stupid thing to mourn. One of the wolves, larger than the rest, with a pelt the color of a thundercloud and eyes of molten gold, rose to its feet. It was impossibly large, its shoulders as high as her waist. It did not approach. It simply looked at her, a long, assessing gaze that seemed to strip away her skin and see the trembling thing beneath. Sigrid did the only thing she could. She bowed her head, exposing the back of her neck in the universal gesture of submission. "I am nothing. I am not a threat." After a moment that stretched into an eternity, the great wolf turned its head. It let out a low, guttural sound, not a growl, but a command. As one, the other wolves rose and melted back into the encroaching woods. The path to her door was clear. She stumbled inside, her legs shaking so badly she had to grip the doorframe. She didn't light a candle. She sank to the floor in the darkness, listening. For the first time since she had moved in, she could not hear the scratching of the rats. The cottage was utterly, terrifyingly silent. The next morning, the scullery was buzzing. "The wolves," a younger maid, Elspeth, whispered, her eyes wide. "They were at the rat house last night. Sigrid's cottage." Corinne sniffed, polishing a silver platter with aggressive energy. "Good. Maybe they'll scare her off for good. Place should be torn down anyway." "No, you don't understand," Elspeth insisted, her voice dropping lower. "They cleared the whole cottage of rats overnight. The stablemaster saw it. Piles of them, dead by the woodpile, not a mark on them. Just dead." "And the wolves never touched the cottage itself? Just sat there?" Corinne paused, her expression twisting into something ugly. Disbelief warring with jealousy. Why would the king's wolves do a servant's pest control? It made no sense. She shot a venomous glare at Sigrid, who was scrubbing a pot, her face a careful blank. Sigrid heard every word. Her hands didn't stop moving, but the pot she was scrubbing swam in her vision. The wolves hadn't come to kill her. They had come to help? The thought was so absurd it made her feel dizzy. Why? Why would the king's own beasts care about the vermin in a servant's hovel? That evening, she approached her cottage with a mix of dread and a strange, fragile curiosity. The pile of dead rats was gone, as if it had never been. The air felt cleaner, lighter. The oppressive stench of rodent filth was gone, replaced by the clean scent of pine and damp earth. She walked the perimeter of the cottage, her worn shoes making soft sounds on the path, and then she saw it. Behind the gorse, near her secret garden, a splash of dark color against the green. It was one of the wolves. It lay on its side, its breathing shallow. It was not the great golden-eyed one, but another, smaller beast with a pelt the color of wet slate. Its leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, and a dark, ugly wound marred its flank, crusted with blood and dirt. It had been left behind. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. This was a king's wolf. To touch it, to interfere, was surely a death sentence. The pack had abandoned it. She should run. She should go inside, bolt her door, and pretend she had seen nothing. But the wolf whimpered, a low, pained sound that cut through all her fear. Its eyes, a pale, hazy blue, were fixed on her. They held no threat, only agony. She thought of all the times she had been hurt, all the times she had been left alone with her pain. She looked at the suffering animal, and she did not see a monster or a king's weapon. She saw a creature in need. Slowly, her heart thudding, she moved closer. "Easy," she whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. "I'm not going to hurt you." She knelt beside it, her hands hovering. The wound was deep, inflamed. It needed to be cleaned. From her garden, she gathered yarrow to staunch the bleeding and broad-leafed plantain for a poultice. Her hands, usually so stiff and clumsy, moved with a newfound purpose. She fetched water from the well, tore a strip from her already ragged underskirt, and began to clean the wound. The wolf trembled but did not snap at her. It watched her with those pained, hazy eyes, its head resting on its paws. As she worked, a strange warmth bloomed in her palms. It was a familiar feeling, the one she got when she tended her garden, a gentle thrum of life that seemed to flow from her into the soil. Now, it flowed into the wolf. She pressed the poultice against the wound, and the wolf sighed, a long, shuddering breath, and its eyes fluttered closed. She didn't know how long she stayed there, kneeling in the dirt, one hand resting on the wolf's flank. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. A profound stillness settled around them. You left one of your hounds behind. The voice was deep, resonant, and so unexpected that Sigrid cried out, snatching her hand back. She scrambled to her feet, turning to face the trees. A man stood there, emerging from the shadows as if he were made of them. He was tall, broader than any man she had ever seen, dressed in dark, simple leathers that did nothing to hide the sheer power in his frame. His face was harsh, carved from granite and shadow, all sharp angles and stark planes, but it was his eyes that stole her breath. They were the same molten gold as the lead wolf's. It was him, King Bastian. Terror seized her. She fell into a clumsy curtsy, her eyes fixed on the ground. "Your Majesty," she breathed, her voice a dry whisper. "Rise," he commanded. His voice wasn't loud, but it held an absolute authority that vibrated in her bones. She rose, her head still bowed, her hands clenched at her sides. She could feel his gaze on her, heavy as a physical weight. "I asked you a question," he said, his tone dangerously soft. "It was injured, Majesty," she stammered, not daring to look at him. "It was left behind. I was only trying to help." Silence. The wind rustled the leaves. The injured wolf whimpered softly in its sleep. "You were not afraid," he stated. It wasn't a question. "I was," she admitted, her voice barely audible, but it was in pain. He moved closer. She could smell him now. Pine, cold air, and something else. Something metallic and sharp, like winter ozone. She risked a glance up at him through her lashes. He was looking not at her, but at her hands. "You have a healer's touch," he murmured, a strange note in his voice. She flinched, hiding her hands in the folds of her skirt. Her raw, chapped servant's hands? They were good for nothing but scrubbing. "No, Majesty, I just know a little about herbs." He looked at her then, a direct, piercing gaze that made her feel transparent. "My wolves do not tolerate the touch of strangers. They do not accept aid. Yet, this one sleeps under your hand as if you were one of the pack." He took another step, looming over her. She had to crane her neck to see his face, a face etched with a weariness that seemed centuries deep. "Who are you?" "Sigrid, Majesty. I am a scullery maid." The words sounded foolish, inadequate. "A scullery maid," he repeated, the words flat. He looked from her to the sleeping wolf, then to her hidden garden, where the pale rose seemed to glow in the twilight. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Confusion? Intrigue? "My wolves cleared your cottage of vermin. They have never done such a thing. They ringed this place as if it were a holy shrine. And you are not afraid of them." He was trying to solve a puzzle, and she was the missing piece. The thought terrified her. She wanted to be invisible, to fade back into the gray drudgery of her life. His attention was a spotlight, and she was not used to the light. "I don't know why they did that, Majesty," she whispered truthfully. "I am no one." "No one," he echoed, his voice a low rumble. He reached out, and for a terrifying second she thought he was going to strike her. Instead, his fingers, surprisingly gentle, brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch was shockingly cold. Not the damp chill of the scullery, but a deep, penetrating cold, like a shard of ancient ice. It was so cold it almost burned. She flinched back from the contact, a gasp escaping her lips. He withdrew his hand instantly, his expression shuddering. The air between them grew thick with a tension she didn't understand. The brief, almost gentle moment was gone, replaced by the glacial authority of a king. "See that the wolf is cared for," he commanded, his tone once again remote. "You will speak of this to no one, to anyone." And then he was gone, melting back into the woods as silently as he had appeared. Sigrid was left standing there, her heart pounding, the ghost of his freezing touch lingering on her cheek. She was no one, but the king and his wolves seemed to disagree. and she had no idea if that was a blessing or a death sentence. For 3 days, she tended to the injured wolf. She named him Slate, for the color of his fur. She brought him water and scraps of her own food, which he took gently from her hand. She changed his poultice, her touch growing more confident as the warmth bloomed in her palms each time she helped him. The wound began to heal with unnatural speed, the inflammation receding, new skin forming. She felt a strange kinship with the quiet, wounded animal. He was an outcast, like her. A broken piece of the king's power, left behind. On the fourth morning, he was gone. There was no sign of his presence, save for a slight depression in the grass where he had lain. A pang of loss, sharp and unexpected, went through her. She was alone again. That night, there was a soft scratching at her door. Not the frantic scrabbling of rats, but a single, deliberate sound. Her breath caught. Cautiously, she opened the door a crack. The great wolf with the golden eyes stood there. It held something in its massive jaws. It lowered its head and gently deposited its burden on her doorstep before backing away into the shadows. It was a rabbit, freshly killed, a gift. This became their new routine. She would find offerings on her doorstep, a brace of birds, a fat fish from the river. The king's wolves were feeding her. The scullery maid who lived in the rat house. Corinne noticed the change in her. Sigrid was no longer as gaunt. There was a quiet light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The jealousy festered. "Stealing from the kitchens, are we?" Corinne hissed one afternoon, cornering her by the waste bins. "Getting fat while the rest of us work." "No," Sigrid said, her voice quiet but firm. She met Corinne's gaze, something she rarely did. Corinne was taken aback for a second, then her lip curled. "Don't lie to me. I'll find out what you're up to. And the king will hear of it." A few nights later, the king returned. He appeared at her cottage door as silently as before. This time, she wasn't as afraid. She opened the door and curtsied. "Majesty." "May I enter?" he asked. The formality of it was absurd. He was a king. He could go wherever he pleased. She stepped aside and he filled the small room with his presence. The cottage seemed to shrink around him. He looked around, his golden eyes taking in the bare, clean space. The air was fresh, scented with the herbs she'd hung from the rafters to dry. "It's better," he observed. "Your wolves, Majesty," she said. "My wolves do as they please," he said, though they both knew that wasn't the entire truth. "The injured one has returned to the pack. He is fully healed." He paused. "They say you have a way with wounded things." The words hung in the air. He was talking about more than the wolf. He was talking about himself. She could see the deep, unshakable weariness in him, the lines of pain etched around his eyes. He carried a wound far deeper than the one Slate had borne. "I only did what anyone would do," she demurred. "No," he said, his voice low and intense. He took a step closer, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The deep, unnatural cold radiated from him. No one else would have dared. No one else would have cared. He stopped just before her, so close she could see the flecks of black in his golden eyes. "When you touched him, did you feel anything?" She hesitated. How could she explain the warmth in her hands, the feeling of life flowing from her? He would think her a witch. Corinne's threats echoed in her mind. "I don't know what you mean," she whispered. "Liar," he said, but there was no heat in it, only a pained certainty. He reached out, not to her face this time, but to her hands. He took one of her chapped red hands in his. The cold was breathtaking. It was a living thing, a predatory chill that sank into her bones, searching for warmth to devour. But this time, something else happened. The warmth that had bloomed for the wolf now surged in her palm, a desperate, defiant flicker of heat pushing back against his glacial touch. Bastian gasped, his eyes widening. He stared down at their joined hands. Where her small, rough hand rested in his large, powerful one, the unnatural pallor of his skin seemed to lessen. A faint trace of color returned. The cold receded, just a fraction. "How?" he breathed, his voice raw with a desperate, century-old hunger. "What are you?" He looked up at her, and the mask of the cold, ruthless king was gone. In its place was a man who was lost, haunted, and in profound pain. A man who was drowning in ice and had just felt the sun for the first time. And in that moment, her fear of him vanished, replaced by a wave of compassion so powerful it almost brought her to her knees. The next night, he came again, and the next. They fell into a fragile, secret rhythm. He would appear after the castle was asleep, a shadow detaching itself from other shadows. He would sit in the one rickety chair her cottage offered while she sat on her cot, and they would talk. At first, it was stilted. He asked about her life, and she gave him clipped, careful answers. She asked nothing of him. He was the king. She was a servant. The chasm between them was too vast. But his presence was a balm to her loneliness, and her presence was, somehow, a medicine for him. The terrible cold that lived in him, the curse he never named, seemed to recede when she was near. The warmth in her, the quiet life that flowed from her fingertips and filled her small cottage, was something his own frozen soul craved. One night he arrived shivering, his face pale and drawn. The cold was overwhelming, a palpable aura of frost that made the air crackle. He sank into the chair, his head in his hands, his whole body trembling with a deep internal winter. "It is worse tonight," he rasped, his breath misting in the air. Without thinking, Sigrid went to him. She knelt before him and took his hands in hers. They were like blocks of ice, so cold they felt dead. She held on, pushing her warmth into him, the strange, vital energy that was her secret. She poured it into him, all of it, focusing on driving back the agonizing chill. He groaned, a low sound of relief and pain mixed together. He sagged against her, his head resting on her shoulder. His sheer size and strength were negated by the curse's attack. He was helpless, and she was the only one who could help. Section. This was the beginning of the caretaking. He was the most powerful man in the kingdom, and in the privacy of her tiny cottage, he became her patient. When the cold fits took him, she would hold his hands, her warmth a shield against the ice. She would brew him teas from the herbs in her garden, simple, earthy concoctions that seemed to soothe the storm inside him. He began to talk, not of his kingdom or his power, but of the guilt. "There was a battle," he said one night, his voice a ghost in the quiet room. "At the Blackwood Pass. We were outnumbered. My father's kingdom was about to fall. I was young, arrogant." He stared into the flame of the single candle, but he was seeing something else, a memory 100 years old. "There was a village in the pass. Neutral. They refused to grant my enemies passage, but they also refused to grant it to me." His hand, resting on the table, clenched into a fist. The candle flame flickered as a wave of cold emanated from him. "My advisors said we had to go through, that the lives in that village were nothing compared to the thousands that would be lost if the kingdom fell. They called it a necessary sacrifice." His voice was raw. "But I was the one who gave the order. I watched it burn. Men, women, children." He fell silent. Sigrid's heart ached for him. She reached out and placed her hand over his clenched fist. The ice in his skin bit at her, but she didn't pull away. "The elder of the village, a woman with eyes like chips of flint, she found me after," he continued, his voice barely a whisper. "Her home was ash. Her family was gone. She didn't scream or cry. She just looked at me and said, You who deal in death and call it victory, may you never know warmth again. May your heart turn to ice, and may any love you find be the poison that finishes you. The curse. It wasn't just a curse of cold. It was a curse on love. She died moments later, Bastian finished, his voice hollow. And I have been cold ever since. Now she understood. The gnawing cold, the way he pulled back from her, the profound loneliness in his eyes. He was trapped. He was drawn to her warmth, the very thing that soothed him, but the curse meant that if he let himself feel anything for her, anything like love, it would kill him. Their intimacy deepened, fraught with this terrible new knowledge. Every shared glance, every accidental brush of hands was charged with unspoken danger. He needed her, but needing her was a death sentence. He let her see the man behind the crown, the haunted soldier, the lonely king. In turn, she began to open up to him, telling him of her quiet life, her love for the stubborn plants in her garden, the years of feeling invisible. With him, in the sanctuary of her cottage, she was not invisible. He saw her. He saw the strength she didn't know she had. He would trace the lines on her rough palms, his touch still cold, but gentle. "These are not a servant's hands," he told her one night. "They are a creator's hands. They make things live." Her heart fluttered. No one had ever said anything beautiful to her before, but their secret could not last. Corinne, her jealousy and suspicion growing with each passing day, began to watch Sigrid's cottage. She saw the king's cloaked figure slipping through the woods night after night. She saw the light in the window burning late. She didn't understand what was happening, but she knew it was the source of Sigrid's newfound confidence, and she was determined to destroy it. One night, as Bastian was leaving, Corinne confronted him. She threw herself in his path, feigning distress. "Majesty, thank the spirits I've found you. That girl, the servant Sigrid, she is a witch. She has been seen consorting with shadows, drawing you to her hovel with dark magic. She means to curse you, to bring you down." Bastian's face became a mask of ice. His golden eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. The temperature dropped by 20 degrees. "I was addressing my future queen," he said, his voice lethally quiet. Corinne froze, her mouth falling open. "Queen? That nobody? That filth-covered scullery maid?" Bastian didn't wait for her to recover. He swept past her, his mind in turmoil. He had said it. The thought he had been desperately suppressing. Queen. The word felt right. It felt true. And that terrified him more than anything. The curse, which had been dormant, roared to life. The connection to Sigrid, the burgeoning love he felt for her, was now feeding it. That night, the cold fit was the worst it had ever been. He collapsed in his own chambers, his body racked with a chill so profound his guards thought he was dying. Sigrid, hearing the panicked whispers in the castle, knew. She used her invisibility as a servant, slipping through corridors and up back staircases until she reached his rooms. The guards, recognizing her from the king's visits, let her pass. He lay on his bed, his skin unnaturally pale, a sheen of frost on his brow. He was barely breathing. The royal physicians were helpless. She went to him, ignoring their protests. She took his hands. They were inert, lifeless blocks of ice. She poured all her warmth, all her focus, all of her strange energy into him. For hours she stayed like that, a small, determined figure fighting a battle against a century-old curse. Slowly, so slowly, the frost on his skin melted. The tremors subsided. Color returned to his lips. He opened his eyes and saw her. Gratitude, relief, and a devastating love shone in their golden depths. And then it was replaced by sheer terror. He understood. It was their connection that had nearly killed him. The closer they became, the more he loved her, the more powerful the curse grew. Her warmth was a temporary reprieve, but the love it engendered was the true poison. He recovered his strength over the next day, but a terrible decision had formed in his mind. He was a king. He had a duty to his kingdom. And he could not, would not, pull her down into his icy grave. He would not let the curse use his love for her as the weapon of his own destruction. He summoned her to the throne room. Not to her cottage, but to the great cold official hall of power. She came, her heart filled with a nervous hope. He had called her his queen. He sat upon the throne of black stone, every inch the remote and ruthless monarch. The haunted man from her cottage was gone. "Sigrid," he said, his voice echoing in the vast space. It was cold as his touch had been the first time. "Your presence on this estate is no longer required. You have been consorting with forces you do not understand. You are a disruption." The words hit her like a physical blow. She stared at him, her mind refusing to comprehend. Disruption? After everything? "Majesty," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You will be removed from the castle grounds. A place has been prepared for you on the northern cliffs. You will be provided for, but you are not to return. You are not to speak my name. You are an exile." Each word was a stone, building a wall between them. She looked at his face, searching for the man who had shared his pain with her, the man whose hands she had warmed. There was nothing, only the glacial mask of the king. "Why?" The word was torn from her, a single broken sound. "Do not question my decisions," he bit out, his knuckles white where he gripped the throne. "You are dismissed." Tears streamed down her face, hot against her cold skin. She felt the eyes of the court on her, Corinne's triumphant smirk burning into her back. She turned and walked from the throne room, her world shattered. He was pushing her away. He was saving himself. Or so she thought. She didn't understand he was doing it to save her from his curse, from his world, from the love that would kill him. He was choosing his icy loneliness over her potential destruction, and it broke him as much as it broke her. The cart ride to the northern cliffs was a blur of misery. The place he had sent her was a fisherman's abandoned shack, perched precariously on a windswept bluff overlooking a churning gray sea. It was even more desolate than her first cottage. The wind howled relentlessly, a mournful, constant cry. This was not a provision, it was a punishment, a slow, lonely death sentence. The first few weeks were a struggle for survival. The grief was a physical weight, a cold stone in her chest that mirrored the curse she had fought in him. He had used her. He had taken her warmth, and then discarded her when she became inconvenient. The pain of it was a sharper chill than any winter wind, but resilience was woven into her soul. She had survived being an orphan. She had survived being a servant. She would survive being an exile. She turned to the only thing that had ever truly been hers, the earth. The land here was rocky and unforgiving, but she found patches of soil in the crevices. She began to plant. She used her knowledge of herbs, foraging for wild seeds and roots, and she used her gift. The warmth in her hands, no longer given to the king, now poured into the barren ground, and the earth responded. Things grew that had no right to grow on that salt-blasted cliff. A garden bloomed, vibrant and defiant. Vegetables swelled on the vine, herbs grew thick and pungent. The land around her shack, once gray and brown, became an oasis of defiant green. Her power, untethered from him, was growing. It was her own. She learned to fish from the rocks, to read the tides, to find shelter from the storms. She grew stronger, her body lean and tough, her skin weathered by the sun and wind. The soft, overlooked servant girl was being stripped away, revealing something harder, something wilder beneath. But at night, she would stare south towards the distant lights of the castle and ache with a loneliness that was absolute. Back at the fortress, Bastian was dying. Without Sigrid's warmth, the curse reasserted its dominance with a terrifying vengeance. The cold was constant now, a deep, abiding agony. He ruled his kingdom with a frozen fist, his decisions harsher, his temper quicker. His court feared him more than ever. They saw a king descending into tyranny, not a man being consumed from the inside out. He heard reports of her. "The exiled witch thrives," Corinne would say, her voice laced with poison. "They say she has made a paradise on the barren cliffs. She must be drawing power from some dark source." Bastian knew the truth. It wasn't dark power. It was her. It was the life that poured from her. The life he had so desperately craved. And he had thrown it away. Every report of her survival was both a relief and a fresh torment. She was alive, but she was not with him. His guilt, the original source of the curse, festered. He had added a new, fresh sin to the old one. He had broken the heart of the only person who had ever seen the man behind the monster. The cold deepened. His wolf, his very spirit, grew silent within him, fading under the suffocating ice. Corinne saw his deterioration and grew bolder. Her plan had backfired. The king was weaker, yes, but he showed no sign of turning to her. His obsession with the exiled servant girl was now a ghost haunting the castle halls. He would whisper her name in his sleep. Corinne's jealousy curdled into a murderous rage. If she couldn't have him, if she couldn't have the power she so desperately craved, then she would erase the source of her failure. She would kill Sigrid. She believed, in her twisted logic, that removing Sigrid would finally break the witch's hold and the king would be hers. She gathered a few loyal, ambitious guards, men who believed her lies about Sigrid being a dangerous sorceress, and rode north. The bond between Bastian and Sigrid, though stretched thin and fraught with pain, had never truly broken. It was a faint, silvery thread of connection across the miles. That afternoon, as Corinne and her men rode closer, Bastian felt it. A spike of pure terror, sharp and clear, that was not his own. Sigrid. The name was a shout in his soul. He lurched to his feet, scattering maps and reports. The cold in his veins screamed in protest, but the fear for her was a fire that momentarily burned through the ice. He didn't know what the danger was, only that it was aimed at her, and it was imminent. He didn't summon his guard. He didn't wait for a horse to be saddled. He threw open the doors to his chambers and ran, his long dormant wolf lending him a burst of desperate, preternatural speed. He had to get to her. Sigrid was tending her garden when she felt the shift in the air. It wasn't the weather. It was a prickle of malice, a wrongness that made the hairs on her arms stand up. She looked up from her plants and saw them cresting the hill. Corinne, her face a mask of hateful triumph, flanked by 4 armored guards. "The Witch of the Cliffs," Corinne called out, her voice thin and sharp in the wind. "Your games are over. The king has sent us to deliver his final judgment." Sigrid's blood ran cold. The king? After all this, he had sent assassins? The betrayal was so absolute it left her breathless. "I have done nothing wrong," Sigrid said, her voice shaking but clear. She stood her ground in front of her small shack, her garden at her back. "You exist," Corinne spat, "and that is your crime." She drew a short, wicked-looking dagger, its blade coated in something dark and viscous. "He will be free of you, and he will thank me for it." The guards advanced, swords drawn. Sigrid backed away, her heart hammering. There was nowhere to run. The cliff edge was 20 feet behind her, the churning sea below. She braced herself for the end, a wave of despair washing over her. She thought of Bastian, his haunted golden eyes, the feel of his icy hand in hers. She had loved him. Even after everything, she had loved him. Just as the first guard lunged, a black and gray blur erupted from the path. It was Slate, followed by the rest of the king's pack. They had come. They slammed into the guards with silent, lethal force, a whirlwind of fang and claw. But they had not come for the guards. They had come for him. Bastion appeared behind them, his face a deathly mask, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had run the whole way, burning through the last of his reserves. He saw Corinne, saw the poisoned dagger, saw the murderous intent in her eyes as she bypassed the wolves and lunged for a stunned Sigrid. No! The word was torn from Bastion's throat, a sound of pure agony. He threw himself forward, covering Sigrid's body with his own. He moved with the last explosive burst of his strength, a king protecting his queen. Sigrid felt the impact as he collided with her, knocking them both to the ground. She heard him cry out, a sharp, broken sound. Corinne stumbled back, the dagger slipping from her grasp, her face a picture of shock. Bastion lay half on top of Sigrid, his weight a deadening anchor. She struggled out from under him and turned him over. The hilt of Corinne's dagger was embedded high in his chest, but it wasn't the blood that terrified her. It was the ice. A web of black, frost-like veins was spreading out from the wound, covering his skin, his clothes. The curse, accelerated by the poison and the gaping wound, was consuming him in his final moments. His body was turning to frozen stone before her eyes. "Bastion!" she choked out, grabbing his hand. It was no longer cold. It was lifeless. His golden eyes, already glazing over, found hers. The ice was creeping up his neck, frosting his jaw. "I love you," he rasped, the words a puff of white mist. "Forgive me." It was a confession and an apology, a final, desperate truth. He wasn't pushing her away to be cruel. He was trying to save her. It was all to save her. The realization shattered the last of her defenses. "No," she whispered, tears freezing on her cheeks. "No, I don't accept this." The wolves stood in a silent, mournful circle around them. Corinne, horrified by what she had done, was paralyzed. The guards were dead or dying. Sigrid looked down at the man she loved, his life turning to ice under her hands. He was dying. He was leaving her. And she would not let him. A rage, pure and clean and brighter than any sun, erupted in her chest. It was not a rage at Corinne, or at the curse, or even at him. It was a rage against death itself. It was the fury of a garden that refuses to die in the frost. It was the life inside her roaring its defiance. She pressed her hands to his chest on either side of the dagger. "You will not leave me," she commanded, her voice ringing with a power she had never known. "You will not die." The warmth in her palms exploded. It was not a gentle thrum anymore. It was a supernova. A blinding green and gold light erupted from her, engulfing them both. The ground beneath them groaned. Thick, thorny vines, covered in pale, glowing roses, burst from the earth, wrapping around them, cocooning them. The power, her power, the power of life and earth, poured from her into him. It was a torrent, a flood, a force of pure creation battling a century of icy decay. She felt the poison burn away into nothing. She felt the unnatural cold shatter like glass. She felt the ancient curse, the words of a dying woman, dissolve under the sheer, unmaking force of her love. She pushed and pushed, giving him everything, her own life force draining away as she poured it into him. She felt herself fading, but she didn't care. Let it take her, as long as he lived. The light receded, the vines unwound, sinking back into the earth, leaving a circle of impossible blossoms on the cliff's edge. Sigrid collapsed onto his chest, spent and empty. A hand, warm and strong, came up to cup the back of her head. She lifted her eyes. Bastion was looking down at her. The frost was gone. The deathly pallor was gone. The wound was a healing scar. His golden eyes were clear and bright, and for the first time, his skin, his touch, was warm. Utterly, blessedly warm. He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a desperate strength. He buried his face in her hair, and she felt the tremors that shook his body were not of cold, but of overwhelming, shattering relief. They held each other, two broken halves made whole, breathing in the scent of salt and roses and new life. Corinne was brought before them in the throne room a week later. She expected death. She stood, head bowed, awaiting the swing of the executioner's axe. But the woman who stood beside the king's throne was not the servant she had tormented. Sigrid was dressed in simple green wool, but she wore an aura of quiet, unshakable power. The life that flowed from her seemed to fill the entire hall. "I understand your desperation," Sigrid said, her voice soft but resonant. "You were trying to reclaim something your family lost. You chose the wrong path, a path of hatred and fear." Bastian watched Sigrid, his expression full of awe and love. He deferred to her judgment. "You will not die," Sigrid continued. "Death is too easy an escape. You will be sent to the monastery in the Grey Hills. You will spend your days in quiet contemplation, tending the sick and learning the value of a life spent in service to others, not to ambition." It was a mercy Corinne did not deserve, and she knew it. It was a queen's judgment, not a tyrant's. She was led away, not in chains, but in a profound and humbling silence. Months passed. The land flourished under its new queen. The story of the Witch of the Cliffs who became Queen of the Roses was told in hushed, awed tones. The unnatural cold that had plagued the coastal kingdom for a century was gone, replaced by long, sunny days and gentle rains. Sigrid's power settled within her, a calm, steady wellspring of life. She learned to control it, to use it to heal the land and its people. She was no longer invisible. She was seen, she was loved, and she was revered. One evening, Bastian found her not in the castle, but at her old cottage. It was no longer a leaning shack. She had transformed it. Roses and ivy climbed the walls, the roof was thick with moss, and the garden had expanded to surround it in a riot of color and fragrance. She was on her knees in the dirt, her hands buried in the rich, dark earth, a contented smile on her face. He came and knelt beside her, his own large hands resting on the ground next to hers. He was no longer the haunted king. The guilt of his past was still there, a scar on his soul, but it no longer defined him. Her love had not erased his past, but it had given him a future. "I used to hate this place," she said quietly, not looking at him. "It was cold and lonely." "And now?" he asked, his voice a low, warm rumble. She looked at him then, her eyes full of a fierce, gentle love. "Now, it is home." He leaned in and kissed her, a long, slow kiss full of warmth and promise. The setting sun bathed them in golden light, and the scent of roses and damp earth enveloped them. The king and the servant, the ice and the warmth, the broken and the healer. They were home, together. And the cold was finally, truly gone.